Welcome to the Church Solutions Podcast, brought to you by JSL Solutions. The Church Solutions Podcast is designed to help equip you and your church in the use of technology and other tools and services. And now, here are your hosts, Steve Lacy and Phil Thompson.
And welcome, everybody, to another edition of the Church Solutions Podcast.
Hi, my name's Steve Lacy.
And I'm Phil Thompson. We come to you just about every week, unless somebody's on vacation or we just decide not to do this. But this is a podcast that we have been doing for a number of years, and we are actually a tech company, aren't we, Steve?
We are. We are JSL Solutions.
And we, go ahead.
We provide streaming products, church management systems, church websites, and mobile apps.
And we also love to help churches and ministries, and so even though we are a tech company, we do talk a lot about things that enable and encourage pastors, volunteers, those kinds of positions and people involved in ministry. And today we're not actually going to talk about tech stuff, but we've actually got a special guest in the studio today.
Yeah, in his studio.
It's actually his office.
We came to him.
That's right. We have microphones and we will travel.
Yes.
And we do that very well. So our guest is David Drum, and David is a pastor here in town. Do you still consider yourself a pastor?
Yes, I'm just in a non-traditional setting.
Exactly, and that's what we want to talk to you a little bit about today, because what you're doing is very unique. It's very different, and I have, quite frankly, I'm not familiar with anybody else that's doing it outside of Tucson, Arizona. But first, let me give you a little background on Dave. Dave has been a pastor and is a pastor and been doing it for what, over 20 years? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I was in one church for 21 years.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and then they fired you. No, I'm just
something like that. Yeah.
Just kidding. Yeah. Just kidding. Dave's written a couple books. One of them is Jesus' Surprise Strategy. And then the other one is If It Was Easy, Jesus Wouldn't Have Prayed for It. That's the last one you wrote, or is this
yes,
the first?
That's the last one. It just came out a couple months ago.
All right, great. So we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment, but those are available, on Amazon?
They're on Amazon. They're available also through the For Tucson website.
Okay. All right, well, we're going to talk about For Tucson because in addition to being a lead pastor for many years, you are now with an organization. You are actually the full-time director of what's called the Church Development Module, or...
Yeah, I'm the full-time director of the church domain.
Okay, church domain, and which might be a little confusing to some people, but the ministry or the organization.
Make it clear.
What's that?
We'll make it clear.
Yeah, make it clear. And but the organization is For Tucson.
Yep, the number 4 Tucson.
The number 4, and then Tucson.com is the website, so fortucson.com. And this is pretty unique because you guys are out to change your city. So I'll let Steve in on the conversation here in a moment. But I'm just going to ask you, in a nutshell, can you describe what For Tucson is?
Right. For Tucson is a ministry that one way to talk about it is we're the part that connects the parts. So there's a lot of different parts in the body of Christ, a lot of different ministries, churches, nonprofits, Christians in multiple sectors, but they tend to stay isolated from each other. And so our job is to connect the parts, but then for a strategic purpose, and that purpose would be city transformation. We want to see Tucson bring honor and glory to God, which will then also bless everybody who lives here.
So you're working at the city level to bring, so the parts would be churches and ministries throughout town, and you're kind of above that, trying to coordinate, integrate, get everybody rowing in the same direction for the benefit of the whole town, at the town or city level, right? Is that a way to describe it?
Yeah, that'd be a way to describe it. We're working with organizations like churches and nonprofits or Christian schools, organizations like that. But more than that, we're working with every individual Christian who, some of them work in those settings, but the vast majority of them are teachers or people in business or in government or healthcare. Those are what we call our domains.
Okay.
So when we bring individuals together in the domains where they have experience and relationships and training, then we can be salt and light throughout the entire city. And that's the first part of For Tucson strategy.
Okay. Is there a domain dedicated to city government, or
Yes.
that Okay.
We have 12 domains. Government is one of the 12. Church is the one that I lead. It's one of the 12.
Okay. What are some of the others that?
Education.
Give us all 12.
Okay.
No, you don't have to give us all of it.
Yeah, we'll see how many of them I remember without looking at one of our graphics. So, government, philanthropy, education, media arts, prayer, education, church, business, healthcare, sports, justice. That might be all 12.
Yeah, and so you've got a domain leader for each of these separate domains, and so
Right.
the government one would be working with government city leaders and that sort of thing too.
Yep. All levels of government.
Right. Okay. So in education, we'll be working with the school districts and
Public schools, private schools, charter schools, all levels of education, individual teachers, administrators, parents.
okay. And what? Let's just take education for example. What's the driving purpose, or what are you trying to bring the gospel to the education domain, or is it? What is it?
Sure. Well, we've set a goal. It's an audacious goal. Most of our goals tend to be that way. We would love to see the schools in Tucson be in the top 10% in the country. Now, we're nowhere close to that.
Yeah, we're like 49th, right?
Pretty well, yeah. So, but we'd like to see that change. That would bring honor and glory to God, but it would benefit every student in our city. It would change the whole economy of the city. There's all kinds of things. It's like the old adage that when the tide rises, it brings all the boats with it. So that would be true in every one of the domains. But in education, that's the big goal that we'd like to see. So along the way, then Christians. We've got churches that come along. So within each domain, there's activity, but a lot of the real transformation happens when you bring domains together.
Okay.
So the intersection of the church domain, the prayer domain, and the education domain is what creates church-school partnerships.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what that means practically is that there's a local school, probably the church that's nearest to it, comes alongside that school, prays for the school, gets to develop a relationship, says, what do you need? How can we help you? You don't have to believe like I believe to care about what I care about. So we're not only talking about Christian schools, but public schools. They've got tremendous needs. And so when a church comes alongside and says, how can we help? There's all kinds of practical ways that happens. In the process, then, we do that. For Tucson is unapologetically centered on Jesus. We're a Christian organization. The people that we mobilize are Christians. Everybody knows that. So in the process, you get many opportunities to build relationships and share the gospel. But that's not the calling card. The
Right.
calling card is, how can we help? How
Right.
can we serve you?
Do you run into, because like just as Steve asked you about, how does this practically work with the, churches helping schools?
Right.
What do you run into any issues with conflicts because of the separation,
Yep.
of church and state, and no prayer in public school? I
Right.
mean, how do you handle that, and how does that work?
Yeah. Well, it's a really good question, and it's a question that comes up every single time that we talk about church-school partnerships. So a couple of different ways to talk about that. We kind of work bottom up and top down. So bottom up would be a church coming to a school that's in their neighborhood, one-on-one, develop a relationship. And it's going to depend a little bit on the principal or who the person is. Mm-hmm. If that person happens to be somebody who's had terrible experiences with Christians and wants nothing to do with them, that's going to be hard to get
Right.
going very far.
Right.
Top down is that Bernadette Gruber, who's the education domain director, I'm the church domain director, we meet with superintendents and staffs. And so part of the training that we provide is what are the laws on what you can do and what you can't do. There's actually a whole lot more that Christians can do than what most people think we can.
Oh yeah, that's for sure.
And so it's actually, at this stage of the game, it's harder to convince churches that schools want them than it is to convince schools that they'd like help. So we have more schools seeking church partners than we have churches.
Really?
Yeah. We are now at a place where we have over 80% of the public schools in Tucson have a church that's adopted them. And so just to be clear, that's 80 as in 80, not 8%.
Wow.
It's the new normal. Because we have earned the trust of school districts, because part of the training that we do is here's what you can do, here's what you can't do. We provide that training for superintendents and school districts, but we also provide it for churches. Here's what you can do, here's what you can't do. Our job, we want to make their job easier, not harder. Now, when you build trust, then that opens up all kinds of other doors. So we've got Christians that have been invited to serve on the policy setting groups of districts, be part of the team that calls the principal. We were just invited to be part of a community-wide steering team for a superintendent of a school district. That's the place where we can actually start to make a significant difference in shaping policy. But on an individual basis, when a church comes alongside a school, prays for them, maybe provides meals that raise the morale of the staff, maybe it's mentoring, maybe it's tutoring. All it takes is a couple of good stories where we've got two of those early on, where we had two schools that were D-ranked schools that went to B-ranked schools in 1 year because of the church-school partnership.
Wow.
All it takes is a couple of those stories, and principals would have to be foolish to say not interested, because these are people who are there. Ideally, they're there selflessly. They're not seeking credit. All the values that we have in the Christian church and in the kingdom are godly values. Everybody would appreciate those. So if we do that, and if we do it well, then it just opens up all kinds of additional doors.
Wow, that's super.
So going back to, you said 80% of all the schools, so we're talking elementary, middle, high school, have at least one. Is there opportunities where multiple churches were sponsoring?
Many times there's multiple churches that are working with the same school, but 80% of the public schools, it's actually now over that mark, but a year ago it was 80%, of the public schools in our city have a church that has come alongside them on a regular, ongoing basis to say, how can we help? We want to be part of the solution. What it's led to is that we have multiple school districts, including the 3 largest school districts in our city, who now regularly hold pastor appreciation events, breakfasts or lunches, to say to the Christian community, we have so appreciated the help that you've provided, and here's 10 more areas where we'd love to have your help.
So, digging, I'm just curious on this.
Yeah.
My wife is a teacher,
so is mine.
So maybe it's a natural deal here, but as the churches sponsor a school, and they may, like my wife, she comes home some days and she's like, wow, all the kids got Chick-fil-A sandwiches for lunch. And I'm like, well, where did that come from? She goes, I'm not sure. I don't know. And I'm thinking, well, now I'm talking to you, I'm thinking maybe their sponsored church
probably
bought them lunches for everyone, the staff and the kids and everyone, but she didn't know who provided it. And are there guidelines between, you can't let them know that the Baptist church down the road just bought all these things for us, and the kids run home to their parents and say, hey, the Baptist church down here.
No, that's not a guideline in terms of a legality. It would be fine for them to know, but we have often trained churches, the less credit you seek, the more credit that the school tends to give you. So that's just a principle. It's not a law. It's just it's kind of selfless, unconditional service. And the more of that we do, we've got story after story. One of the schools where the church that came alongside them, they didn't have anybody in that church that was either a student or a teacher at that school. And so all the buzz, we had one of our teachers, one of the teachers at that school shared this story at one of our big citywide events. So all the buzz in the teacher's lounge when this first started was, what do they want? What's the real? There's got to be a catch here somewhere. And after several months of its just selfless service, this church happened to meet in the school, so they were renovating the multipurpose room, but with the understanding that it stays with the school. They benefit from it while they're there, but when they leave, it's the school's. And so it's a gift to the school that they get a little bit out of, but the school gets to use all during the week. Wow. And so when more and more of the faculty found out that, no, they're just here to help us, then there were 2 teachers from that school that said, well, gosh, it's been a long time since I've been in a church. If that's what Christ followers look like, I'd like to go check that out. Yeah. So they did. Yeah. Your earlier question, do we have resistance in this? Couple of our stories in one of the larger school districts in town, the very first time that we were meeting with all of the department heads, there was one person who their body language was not subtle. They were, how soon can the Christians get out of our space was pretty clearly what was screaming. Right. And so after a few months, where this was a person that was working in an area of working with a lot of homeless kids and kids that are at risk and dropping out and all that. So she came with a couple of needs. The church met the needs. Like 6 months later, she made this statement at one of our meetings. Around here, every time I ask for something, the answer is always no. But when I ask you Christians, the answer is always yes. Wow. Well, that's a pretty cool testimony. Yeah. So fast forward a couple months later, and we're there. We meet with them every month. We've been doing it now for 5 years. So a couple months later, this was her and one other person. Their comment was, the morale around here is so low. It's so hard. The best day of our month is the day that you Christians show up.
Wow. That's interesting.
So one more. So then the next year, we do trainings around town and to some Ministry Alliance and other things. And so she starts coming to some of our trainings. And I'm not making this up. She comes to Bernadette and myself after one of the trainings. She's got tears streaming down her face. We're a Christian organization, and that we've not apologized for that. So here's what she says to us. She says, I don't quite know how to describe it, but I've discovered that I've got this hole in my heart. And when I'm around you Christians, it gets filled up. But then when I leave, I can't find a way to sustain that. Is that something you think you could help with? So, we didn't have to think too long in terms of how to answer that question. So this same person has now retired from the district and is in another community and starting church school partnerships in that community. So we've got a lot of those kinds of individual stories. So you combine the individual stories with the big organizational stories where whole schools are transformed. Right. And then it becomes its own motivator. Now all the momentum is on the side of this is a good thing, and how can we open up more doors?
So this is just one domain.
Correct.
You spouted off about 12 domains that For Tucson deals with. I saw Paul Parisi the other day. I've known Paul for a long time.
Yep.
Back in the radio days. I don't know. I think one of his businesses or something. Yep. And Paul is the director of the government domain.
Correct.
Can you just very quickly, how does that work? How does Paul get his nose involved? That sounds kind of a derogatory term, but how does he get involved? How does he get involved in the government? I mean, I've prayed at, we have a Pima County Board of Supervisors. Sure. They have a meeting once a month, and I've done the opening deal, and I've seen them there.
Yep.
So tell us how the government domain works.
So the secret sauce to all of this is pretty simple. It's all about relationships, and there's no shortcut to relationships. Yeah. So the same kind of training that any Christian would receive in a church on anything, how do you build relationships? Well, apply that. So in the government domain, Paul builds relationships. And so he builds relationships. It's nonpartisan, builds relationships with people who are elected officials. It's actually part of what the New Testament tells us that we need to be doing. When we're praying for people in positions of authority, part of that is you can pray more effectively for them if you know them. And so you build relationships. And so then we get the opportunity to pray with them personally as well as for their sphere of influence. So Paul builds relationships. So I'll connect the dots between where we just were. We'd been doing the church school partnerships, which is church domain, education domain, prayer domain, those three working together. We've been doing that for a few years, and we get a call from Department of Child Safety So that's CPS, Child Protective Services, or Department of Child Safety,
Right.
renamed recently in Arizona. And here's the conversation. Quote, the Pima County Director. I was just with her Monday. She says, "We've heard how your churches have adopted schools. Would you consider adopting us too? Because we're in a world of hurt and could really use some help."
Well, that's
So,
for sure.
So that was a wide open door for the Christian church to step alongside. The way it started was to step alongside Department of Child Safety offices. They've got 9 different offices around town. A church could come alongside and adopt that staff. What do you need? How can we pray for you? Sometimes it's something as simple as they're all overworked. They're having to do all their paperwork on volunteer hours on the weekends. Provide a pizza lunch for them. It's the first time anybody in the community has ever done anything positive for them.
Wow.
And so there's tears that come from something as simple as a church bringing in a lunch to say, thanks for caring for some of our most vulnerable families in the community.
Wow.
Well, that has directly led to a government church partnership, Department of Child Safety church partnership. It's called Care Portal, where caseworkers for Department of Child Safety, they go into a home. Maybe a child is about to be removed. Maybe there's a possibility for a kinship placement or something like that. And the only thing holding it back is fill in the blank. Grandma could take care of these kids, but she doesn't have a car seat. The house has bed bugs, and they don't have the ability to take care of that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they don't have any ability. There's no money. They're so strapped for funds.
Right.
But a church could come alongside, pray into that need if they can help. So a church's commitment in Care Portal is we'll receive the requests, we'll pray for the requests, and we'll help if we can help.
Wow.
In 1 year's time, 1,200 children in our community were directly impacted by
Wow.
Care Portal because of a partnership with the church. The foster care numbers in Pima County, for the first time in anybody's recollection, actually dropped. They'd always grown in terms of the number of kids in foster care.
Right.
And one of my favorite statistics out of all that, they do surveys, and so it's like evaluating a restaurant. So they had, I don't remember what it was, 800 reviews or something like that from DCS caseworkers. 100% positive rating.
Wow.
From
amazing.
the government.
That's
So that is government, social services,
Right.
and church partnership. Those 3 domains working together.
Wow.
So
Fascinating.
you can just imagine, take 12 domains, imagine all of the partnerships that you could come up with
Right.
between any 2 of the domains, as well as what happens within a domain. Within the church domain, we've got churches that are African American, Hispanic, and Anglo that have never even met one another, and now we're all best friends. So that's just within our domain. So you can easily begin to see how you take 12 domains, all the work that could happen within the domain, but then all the work that happens in the partnership of the domains. It's not hard to see how you'd see transformation at a citywide level.
That's
but that's
fascinating.
actually just the first part of our strategy. That domains is part 1.
Okay. So we may need to do a part 2 here one of these days.
I
'cause,
understand.
we're running out of time. So if people listening to this podcast, and I'm sure there's some of them going, wow, that's pretty incredible. How could I get something like this going in the city I live?
Right.
We've only got a couple minutes.
Okay.
Where would they start? I mean, we could certainly send people to you and to the website, but...
Well, the website is a good place to start. One of the things that you'll find already,
Which
and
was
4tucson.com. The number 4 Tucson.com. It's
Okay.
pretty simple, but it's the number 4. So number 4 Tucson.com. You'll find a lot of information on the website, but we have a couple of resources that are designed to help with this. We would say in Tucson, I just shared this story, we actually were invited up to Phoenix just on Saturday with that exact same question. It's called Movement Day, and the question was, how do you start a city movement?
Right.
And here was our story. So we did a workshop up there at this statewide gathering, and so we're getting asked that question more and more. So we believe that one of the places that it starts is with pastors praying for one another. You would think that would be simple. It takes the faith to move mountains. To actually, that's why the second book that I wrote was called "If It Was Easy, Jesus Wouldn't Have Prayed for It." So it's not quite as simple as it sounds. But the reason, actually, that I wrote the two books that I wrote was not only to help in Tucson, but in some other communities. So those are resources that are available on the website. If you go to the store site, you'll see them both there. Our founder, Mark Harris, his book will be done in a couple more months, and it's more of a manual on what we've done and how another community could replicate it if they want to.
Great.
That'll be available pretty soon. And then all of us are available. We talk to people from other cities all along the time. One more quick commercial, depending on who else listening for this. We kind of feel like we've learned enough now in the last 7 years that we have some things that we can share. And so we're offering our very first national conference in January. January 28th of 2018, last Saturday of January, will be a conference for Tucson folks. It will take you not from theory, but straight into engagement. Here's how you can make a difference in the second part of our strategy. We're working on poverty reduction and education. That'll be another podcast.
Wow.
But everybody can make a difference in those two areas. And so for Tucson folks, it'll show you how. The goal is when you walk out, you'll say, here's my part of the big picture of what God's doing in our city. For folks from other communities, there's a city leader track that'll parallel right alongside. The Luis Palau Association is helping us with the conference and sponsoring it. And so it'll be the first of an annual conference that we're doing.
How do you pay your bills?
We have individuals who partner with us for $10 a month, and organizations for $35 a month. If people want to do more than that, they can. But we want to see the whole body of Christ invested in what Jesus prayed for. Jesus prayed in John 17 that our unity would be so complete, these are literally his words in verse 23, that the world would come to know who Jesus is and the love of the Father, the love that God has for the world. We see that happening in our city. And so we want to see that. I describe my job most often as I'm an employee of John chapter 17. So we have individuals and organizations that partner with that. Some, of course, want to do more than that, but we want everybody pulling on the same end of the rope. So we've set it low. We'd love to see 100,000 people in Tucson investing in that prayer.
Yeah. Awesome. All right.
Awesome. Great.
Super.
Impressive.
It really is.
There's lots more. It's really exciting. Do we have time to end with a story?
Sure,
a very
go
short
ahead.
story.
Sure.
So I was born in Tucson, so grew up here. So one of my friends that I'm working with on a citywide project that I've known since I was 10 and she was 7. So she made the comment a couple of months ago after a big citywide retreat that brought together people from 25 different churches, from all different ethnicities, denominations. It's the coolest thing ever. And so she made this comment. She said, "This is the first time in my life that I've been proud to call Tucson home." Wow. Because there are things happening here that are just so exciting. I can't wait to tell other people about it. And a lot of us feel that way, and it's all God. None of us are smart enough to think this up. So
that's good.
It's exciting.
Awesome. All right.
Great.
Well, we're out of time, but we will return again sometime soon and do part 2. Been speaking here with Reverend Dave Drum, and David mentioned his books, Jesus' Surprising Strategy. You can get it at, just go to the number 4tucson.com, or you can get it on Amazon. The other one, If It Was Easy, Jesus Wouldn't Have Prayed for It. And again, we've been talking about this whole thing with 4 Tucson. If you have some feedback, we would love to hear from you. Just send us an email, and probably the simplest one is just support@streamingchurch.tv. Obviously, this was not really a tech-related podcast, but we don't always do tech-related.
Inspirational one, though.
Inspirational, absolutely. And I like this. I'm very impressed. And to me, this is what Christianity is all about, reaching out there and helping people. So send us an email. We'd love to get your feedback on this, and we can pass any information on. There are questions you might have to David. We can pass it on to him as well. And we're out of time, so I will just get us out of here. So for David Drum and then my associate, Steve Lacy across the table here. I'm Phil Thompson. We will catch you next time on another edition of the Church Solutions Podcast. Take care.